So welcome all to the third part of Islam and Autobiography Series by Professor Cooke, and we all know her and she has been introduced before, so I don't think it's the need to introduce her again. So today's talk is entitled Autobiographies, Dialogics of Cyber Self-Writing. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting talk.
Well, I hope some people don't get upset. So, thank you, Arjun. So, so far I've tried to give a broad overview of autobiographies, writing the self in an Islamic context. Last week focused more on women. And I ended up talking about ACI Jabbar, right, if you may remember, talking about collective autobiography. So in some ways, I think today I'm going to be dealing with a topic not too far from the idea of the collective biography as a way of saving these subaltern voices, first retrieving them from having dropped out of the official histories, and now actually writing and speaking oneself into history. So Ercüment Hoca was just asking me about autobiographies, and did I make up the word? No, I didn't. It's a word that I think has been maybe current for, let me see, 2014, so maybe three to 5 years. And there is a woman called Valerie Anishenkova who wrote a book called Autobiographical Identities in Contemporary Arab Cultures. And it was there that I found this neologism. So of course, what we have here with bloggers, and I'm not going to be dealing solely with bloggers. I'm also going to be looking at Facebook and Twitter. So, just different ways of thinking about the ways in which we write our lives. Now, if you remember from the, it would actually be lovely if people would join. Just so I can, if there is so few of you, at least I can see you. So for those of you who were here on the first day, I was talking a little bit about the way in which Dwight Reynolds was seeing autobiographical fragments. So if you remember, he said, 1 or 2 pages, we could consider that an autobiography. I then talked about Nazir Zainuddin and the way in which he used tafsir and interpretation of hadith to write parts of her life. Hard for me to find, but nonetheless, a kind of fragmented autobiography. So when we're looking at an autobiography, so I'm going to start off with the blogging. We have obviously a series of blogs in a way like novels were written in England in the 19th century. Charles Dickens famously would write his novel chapter by chapter, and at the end of each chapter there would be what we call a cliffhanger. So you're on the edge, you really want to know what is happening to the characters, but you have to wait for a week. So there's a little bit of the cliffhanger here, because obviously the person is stopping not so much as a strategic moment, but in that actual moment of tension. The person doesn't know what tomorrow brings, but has set up the context. So what we have here are individual private experiences in public space. And of course, that's so important to think about in contrast with the written, polished versions that we've thought about from Imam al-Ghazali until ACI Jabbar. And when I first was talking with you, the issue was, how do we remember? And isn't it in that moment when you dig deep into an experience, a moment? Last week I talked about Proust's Madeleine, Marcel Proust's Madeleine. So this moment that suddenly triggers a memory, so it's very private. It's something that you do on your own. I can't work with music, but you would need to be really quiet. No barking dogs. We do have barking dogs where we live now. And so you're cleaning out everything so that you have access to that past. But the autobiography is this immediate placing of one's experience into the public space. So it can be my life, and some people write really boringly about the food they eat each day. It could be interesting for some people, I guess. But it can be political or social issues, and so even before you become aware of the fact that you're writing your life for other people's consumption, that you are providing an eyewitness account. And generally, it would be to an important event. So I had a professor from the Azhar University in Gaza come and work with me for a year. He was working on an English writer. And he has been blogging for the past 15 years, but sending it more directly to a few of us. And so, even though he's in literary criticism, he's into literature, what he's doing it is almost like bullet reports from the field. What's important about it, of course, about this mode is the dialogical element of the writing. The minute you write a blog, you're expecting to have an active reader. So generally we're passive. We just absorb, and if we respond at all, it's in a class. But otherwise, you don't expect to have readers respond. For those of us who write books, if you have 20, 30, 50 people respond to your book, that's a lot. That means you've made an impact. But here it can be hundreds, thousands even. There is this trust in Le Jeune's autobiographical pact that I spoke about in the first time. And it's saying, I'm really me. I am really here in Istanbul in this difficult Khashoggi moment, and I can tell you what things are like here, and you're going to see this as we go through. So trust in the autobiographical pact, I think, is really important. And then in general, there is this vernacular style. So it isn't the high-polished, again, always going back to Imam al-Ghazali and al-Munqidh min ad-Dalal, or even of, the same name, Zainab al-Ghazali, her autobiography dealing with her years in prison under Nasser, each written in very high Arabic. But the autobiography in general, regardless of whether it's French or Arabic or Swahili, it's usually vernacular that allows more immediate access. And so as I'm going to be talking most specifically about two cyber self-writings. And so these are just issues to think about as we go through. So I would say that this kind of writing, and it's true also for the Facebook and Twitter, is that you have four kinds of eyes. You have the eye who was the witness, who was there. The eye of the narrator, the eye of the one being narrated, and the I of the ideological self. So the recognition that, or the emerging understanding that one is speaking about a situation like a journalist. So you're between being a journalist and a witness. And then, of course, we have the threaded comments and responses. So you know what I mean by threaded. It's the post, then the first comment, then the response to the comment, and then the response to the comment to the comment. That's called threaded. So we have threaded comments and responses that are instantaneous, back and forth. So you can chat with people you've never heard of, you know, who are responding to you. In real time, exactly. Very nice. So what's important is that this real-time nature of online communication has an impact on subsequent entries. So you can't do what one does when writing, particularly in creative writing, is that you write for one day, and then you go to bed and you sleep, and then you wake up in the morning and you get back into the flow. But you're in the flow of your own creativity. Here, when you wake up in the morning, you could have 10, 20 people responding to you. So it's the active reader and it's the surprised, sometimes, autobiographer. So in this empowered role of what I would call a cyber public intellectual, and what you're going to see in the two cases that I'm going to deal with in some length is the emergence of the cyber intellectual. You start, you don't know if anybody's going to read you, you end up with thousands of people reading you, and you realize that you've acquired a kind of moral authority that gives you a voice for a group. It can be a voice for a generation, for a social class, or any other form of community. The writing style of direct communication with the reader, often addressing them in the second person, and that you'll see very much here, throughout every blog entry, creates a sense of openness and sincerity and establishes a semblance of trust. Dialogical storytelling allows the author to write about feelings, pose questions. That's really important. So it's like, I wonder what people think about what happened, the Khashoggi, how it was in Turkey. So you can ask. So I think what for me is interesting, because much of my work has been on gender, culture, and war crisis, is that within this new blogosphere, you have hybrid informants. You have people of very, very different backgrounds, and then sometimes bloggers will get into communication with each other. What's interesting is that these blogs do something that writing can't do, and that is to populate places that are said to be empty. Now, if you remember what I was talking about last time with the subaltern studies group and subaltern historiography, is that the subaltern voice is there in real time, but in official history it disappears. What happens here is that nobody can ignore the subaltern when the subaltern is speaking. Now, for those of you who know Gayatri Spivak's work, she wrote this important article called "Can the Subaltern Speak?" Exactly. And she's talking specifically about women. The idea being, well, we can imagine these voices between the lines of official history, but is the subaltern actually speaking? And here I would say we have sort of the insertion of the voice that can't be silenced, especially as some of the blogs, when they become more of an item. If this has gone on for a year, and we'll be dealing with that. And I remember I have a student who's got yes, I'll tell you about her. Once you've had it for a year, you've got a book. You really don't have to do anything. You just put the dates and you've got a book. And there's something about this also. It's the many-to-many communication. Because in general, when we write our lives, right, it's the I to the many. But here in this coming together, we have the I becoming the many. So I think it's important to think about this as an ethical practice that takes the other seriously and respectfully, which very often we don't when we write. We just write, and we write our opinions, and I think we're not as ethically engaged because on a daily basis we're getting a response. The chaos and mayhem of the US occupation of Iraq found a new literary outlet in the blogosphere. So I'm going to talk primarily about a woman who still has not identified herself. This is another thing, obviously, that we're familiar with from the internet, is that you can retain anonymity. You know, you can change your avatar, you can change your identity. So she's a woman who at the time of the invasion in 2003 was in her early 20s, and she was a web technician, which explains, as in the case of also Salam Pax, who was very familiar with technology, how they were able to almost immediately after the Americans invaded and occupied Baghdad primarily, but Iraq in general, they could start their blogs. Both of them fluent in American English, which I think is really important and difficult for people to, for Americans to understand. How can an Iraqi be so fluent in English? Both of them, both Salam Pax, and of course that's a pseudonym as well, mock readers who can't believe that Iraqis could be not only as fluent in vernacular English, but as cosmopolitan as they are. And in both cases, we have a sense that they know more about us than we about them. And that's certainly we being Americans, the receivers of this. So here's short pieces from Salam Pax's book. Please stop sending emails asking if I were for real. So local American, right? Not if I am for real, if I were for real. Don't believe it? Then don't read it. I'm not anybody's propaganda ploy. Well, except my own. 2 more hours until the B-52s get to Iraq. So he's going to leave this blog with the B-52s. These are the bombers, the American bombers. They're approaching Iraq. So he writes during the build-up. So it isn't just what Riverbend does. She does it after the Americans have arrived. And in his postings, he describes the hardships of life in Saddam Hussein's paranoid regime. That's very much part also of Riverbend's, but Riverbend's, I think, is more subtle. He reviews the latest CDs by Coldplay and Bjork. So it's like, yeah, I'm in touch with the music that you guys think is cool, but you know, we have to pirate it, we don't buy it. And then gossiping about his employers. Now, what is true for both Salam Pax and for Riverbend is that they risked punishment because, as you probably know, under Saddam Hussein, any form of dissident expression, as in Hafez al-Assad's Syria, might be punished with prison, or it might be punished in some cases by death. And what he was doing was so outspoken under Saddam Hussein that it was remarkable. So here's just a cover of the book, Salam Pax, The Clandestine Diary of an Ordinary Iraqi. Now, this term "look," I don't think it survived. I think nobody really liked it in the beginning, but you know, you have to hold on to the fact that these are blogs. It's not a book, but it's sort of a book. Anyway, I think "look" hasn't worked anymore. So, here's Riverbend. Like Salam Pax, anonymous, we don't know who she is. And she really wrote from a woman's perspective right from the start. And she will have mujadalat with Salam Pax. You said it's like this, no, it's like that. You're complaining about me. So we have this conversation going on with him, and then people begin to enter into the blogosphere with her. So I think about them in the way of all journalists who go to the front. These are kind of dispatches from the front. And what we're going to see, and I'm going to spend half of my time now with Riverbend, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my time with Hijabi Biker. And I'm going to read a little bit of a text to give you a sense of how her self-awareness evolves, and with this self-awareness, responsibility to inform the world, she becomes a journalist. She becomes a witness, and she becomes an informant to the world about Iraq and about women in Iraq, most importantly. Now, I had wanted to play this, but it doesn't matter. I think it'll take up too much time at this point. But if you go online, there's a very short video that was done in German, but that has her some of her language in it. So she began in August of 2003, and she predicts the fake elections, and she is filled with contempt she's filled with contempt for everyone, but in a funny way. So she predicts the fake elections, so almost immediately after the Americans invade. She denounces the Iraqi puppets. She calls the Iraqis that the Americans place like puppets. She calls them the puppets. And most of all, she mocks the term Operation Enduring Freedom. So right from the start, she's like, Operation Enduring Freedom? I don't think so. So during this time, she kept the world abreast of her reactions to social and political developments during the first years of the occupation. She provided a vivid chronicle of how the average Iraqi experienced the occupation. So we have electricity cuts, unbearable heat. Of course, the air conditioning isn't working. She's middle class. This is something that's important also to bear in mind. The women and the men, Salam Pax, that I'm talking about are very middle class. The abduction of family members, the state of constant alertness with bags by the door full of, and I quote, sturdy clothes, bottles of water, important documents like birth certificate and identity papers in case they have to escape, and some spare money in case the ceiling came crashing down or the American tanks came plowing through the neighborhood. Unquote. Keenly aware of foreign readers whom she provided with local and cultural information, Riverbend wrote an idiomatic American English. Her blog was eloquent testimony to her enthrallment with American culture. This is part of something I'm going to talk about a little later, but something that I refer to as multiple critique, and that is you can both love and hate something, and it's not a contradiction. It depends on where you are and the moment in history as to whether you are loving or hating something. So she loves American culture. She obviously hates the American military and the government. And so she provides an important alternative perspective to the one projected by world media and their embedded journalists. Now that, of course, was true that before Bush sent the military into Iraq, he sent embedded journalists who had embedded lawyers with them so that they could work out what was going to be a crime against humanity and what wasn't going to be a crime against humanity. So, whatever. With time and a growing readership, her blog clearly became a lifeline for herself and for others. And Valerie Anishinkova writes that this awareness of the world, not hers, but the bloggers, is typical of the blogosphere in general, where the infinite and at times overwhelming flow of information constructs a distinct global cultural zone. I think this is an interesting term. A distinct global cultural zone which is situated in a virtual space, unrestricted by any type of boundaries, unquote. So her case, but in other blogs also, this literary piece of cyberspace is ongoing, dynamic, and far from ephemeral, since in 2005 she published her Year of Blogs. Her messages are carefully crafted with a sense of satire, and I'm going to read you some of these because remember, these are part of an autobiography of a witness and of a strong social political critic. So, now she says, so now the heads of terrorism in the world seem to be Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. Here's some food for thought. Osama's from Saudi Arabia, al-Zawahiri is Egyptian, and al-Zarqawi is Jordanian. Which countries in the region are America's best friends? All three. Riverbend sarcastically dissects United States official discourse so transparent in the streets of Baghdad. And that, for us in America, was so important also, because we could have hated, and many of us did, Bush at the time. He, of course, looks lovely now. We're nostalgic for Bush. Can you imagine what it's like to be in America now? So it was unthinkable for us that, not for us, but for many Americans, that in the streets of Baghdad there would be such a clear sense of America's policies and deceptions in the region. So she talks about Bush's inarticulate speeches. We always used to make fun of the way he spoke. About the improvements in the lives of Iraqis brought about by the occupation are coupled with reports of US troops murdering Iraqi girls. On November the 22nd, 2003, this is an amazing story. 2 hotels, and I'm still quoting, 2 hotels in the Ministry of Oil were bombed, and donkeys were found in the area, leading colorful carts with missile launchers and missiles camouflaged with hay. The donkeys, looking guilty and morose, were promptly taken into custody for questioning and were not available for a statement. Could this be the first real tie to Al-Qaeda? After months of trying to connect Iraq to terrorist activities, this latest attack on the donkeys could prove to be the Pentagon's missing link. After all, donkeys and mules are very widely used in Afghanistan. Their presence in Baghdad is very suspicious. It is as yet unclear whether the donkeys are foreign guerrillas who crossed into Iraq from one of the neighboring countries, or actually a part of a local Al-Qaeda cell. Baghdad residents are wondering, could these culprits be the first donkeys sent to Guantanamo? Guantanamo is the prison. End of quote. On September the 11th, 2003, she watches a bootleg copy of Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 and wonders whether Americans feel safer since the war on terror became a war on Iraqis, whose dead in 18 months was 8 times greater than those who died in the World Trade Center. Now, I should mention, and it's very important maybe for me to mention it here, is that she talks about 9/11, and this is on October the 21st. She writes, quote, "The majority of Iraqis have a deep," no, that isn't it, sorry. Anyway, what she says is, okay, it's a tragedy what happened in New York, the 3,000 dead, and I mourn for the 3,000, not because they're American who were killed, but because they're human beings who were killed. So beyond black humor, Riverbend provides a powerful example of multiple critique that targets several foes simultaneously. This is something that I developed in a book that came out in 2000 called Women Claim Islam. And it emerges out of a multiple consciousness, right? So we have W.B. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness. I have my own consciousness, but I know I am conscious of the way you are looking at me. So this is sort of a little Hegel's slave-master relationship, but emerged within the racist context of turn of the 20th century Black America. And so to have this consciousness, this not just double but multiple, allows for a multiple critique. This emerges out of Abdelkabir Khatibi's double critique. Anybody heard of him? Okay, very important philosopher from Morocco, who talked about double critique, as if you critique in a post-independence period the colonizer, that does not mean that you are for your corrupt government now. So many of the governments that came to power after the colonizers were kicked out became very corrupt. And to critique your corrupt government does not mean that you wish that the French or the British or the Italians were back. So that's multiple critique. And I take the double critique of Abdelkabir Khatibi much further, because I see, particularly in the case of women, the critique of patriarchy, and then once you've taken it to 3, it's infinite. So she critiques the US government policies that map onto British legacies. Secondly, the American boys and girls, soldiers, even when she recognizes their humanity. And 3, what she refers to as the power-hungry freaks. That's the way she refers to the puppets, who I think only once mentions their names. And for every defense of Islam, the religion, she indicts the criminal Islamist individuals and groups that have tried to control all, not only Muslim, but all women's presence and appearance in a country that, as she said, used to boast the highest levels of education and employment for women in the Arab world. They're now part of a new world disorder, where the political appeal to religion resonates. People who are losing everything need jobs. Islamists exchange social goods for political support. but also transcendental values. They need these values to shape their lives. So, I think also one thing that is important to think about, so we talked about the blogs, the autobiography as this direct communication. But the other advantage that it has, that we might find in footnotes, appendices, here we have hyperlinks. And what they do, of course, is they add depth to personal narrative so that you can tell your story in a linear way. And then if there is information that you wish to give, but that's going to stop the flow of the narrative, you put it into a hyperlink. And then within this hyperlink, you can then simultaneously go to the actual narrative across time, go to the comments, to the narratives from other readers, and then the comments to the comments. And then you, as newly approaching this 2003 autobiography, they can add your comments. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know what 15 years later, one of you from here might have to say about what an Iraqi woman was, the life she was telling. And of course, what this does, I think, is provides a multidimensional aspect to the autobiographical narrative. So the reader experiences the author's story at multiple levels and can dialogue with her about any one of them. You can enter at any time and then hope that maybe 15 years later she'll respond to you about that day. Her attitude to the Americans swings between anger at Rumsfeld and the gloating Bush. And listen to this, quote, who's just as much an ass, she loves donkeys and asses, right? Who's just as much an ass in Baghdad as he is in Washington. And an empathy for the disoriented kids from middle America lurching around the streets of Baghdad that she demands from others. And here it is. 9/11, she writes, was not tragic because 3,000 Americans died. It was tragic because 3,000 humans died. This recognition of the humanity and commitments of others is at the heart of a cosmopolitanism that she characterizes as deeply Iraqi. And this is going to be the last quote from her. It's October the 21st, 2003. And for me, it is in some ways the most articulate, eloquent articulation of cosmopolitanism. And she writes, the majority of Iraqis have a deep respect for other cultures and religions. And that's what civilization is. It's not mobile phones, computers, skyscrapers, and McDonald's. It's having enough security in your own faith and culture to allow people the sanctity of theirs. I read it again. That's what civilization is. It's not mobile phones, computers, skyscrapers, and McDonald's. It's having enough security in your own faith and culture to allow people the sanctity of theirs. So, in her narratives, we read of people keenly aware of the stakes in the national struggle and of their own role as victims. As a victim, as a survivor. In the most recent stage, Riverband assures her readers that Iraqis, like all oppressed people with their own hidden transcripts, who are well aware of their oppressors' agendas, know what the occupiers believe to be their own secrets. Okay, so that's one cyber self-writing. And I'm going to move to just one more extended autobiography in cyberspace. And it's Facebook and Twitter. So, of course, we have with Facebook and Twitter space for autobiographical fragments in words and images. And that, I think, is really important also, because the blogs generally don't have the images, but here we have the two together. And the question that I think we all have to ask ourselves as we start with Facebook, I think people start off very enthusiastic and, oh yeah, this is really fun. And then you look back 2 years and, oh my God, what an idiot, I can't believe I wrote this. And then there's the issue about, you know, your new boss. You know, are people going to hire somebody who has written a Facebook like this or written Twitters like this? And just for my beloved leader, what will history make of Trump's tweeted autobiography? I hope what we make of it today. Okay, so my next cyber autobiography is Roshni Misbah, also known as Hijabi Biker, who launched herself, who wrote, I guess, one of her very first blogs on Women's Day, International Women's Day, March the 8th. And she says, as much as we say we are living modern and free, in some parts of the world, women are still not allowed to do a lot of stuff just because of gender discrimination. I've used the term allowed here because they're just not allowed, which means they can. Women are getting liberated. They're doing excellent in all the fields, be it medical, technical, astronomy, athletics, etc., etc. And so here you have an image, the very first image of her. And notice the English is so-so. It's nowhere near as fluent as Riverbend's. And so she has just started to ride bikes. So in February 18th, again, like the blog, we have the date, and she's showing the various bikes that she rides. She is the fastest woman on a motorbike in India. Have you heard of her? You've heard of her? Yeah, exactly, nowadays. But in February, virtually nobody knew her. So I need to give you a little bit of background. Bruce and I are in Delhi in February of this year. And we're at the Jamia Millia, and we're having lunch in the student cafeteria. And there are 3 people sitting across the table from us. Two women who are covered and a man. And one of the women turns to me and she says, I like your glasses, these ones. I'm like, really? Wow. And then I turn to her and she's wearing these glasses and I said, well, actually, I like yours. So we start talking and she said, oh, I'm Roshni Misbah. We chat a bit, who are you? I'm a professor of Arab cultures. Bruce is a professor of Islamic history. And she said, oh, I'm doing my MA in Islamic studies and I'm studying Arabic now. So this is pretty amazing. And then her friend says, oh, but you know, Roshni is really famous. And I thought, oh, why are you famous? He said, well, she's known as Hijabi Biker. So we start talking about that, and she says, yeah, her fastest speed on a race course is 320 kilometers an hour. Very fast.
There's a video of her, and she says, I have the speed of 320. Not to be a society. So that's fast, not to be a
I love that. So here you see her in you know, with three of her bikes. She loves her, and it's called, there's a bike called Indian, I don't know motorbikes, but actually a friend of ours, an American friend, brought one back from Aligarh. So, not to be outdone, so, you know, she's a bad girl, but no, she's not, because she is doing what I was talking about last time in terms of Islamic feminism. She's doing exactly what Islamic feminists are doing, and that she's saying, I am a deep believer, and from this position of faith, I am challenging my society to let me do whatever I want to do and not to be excluded just because I'm a woman. And in that demand, deepening her religious faith. Because if she can do this within a Muslim community, then this strengthens her faith. Oh yeah, I was going to tell you why we were then competing, because, you know, she's really a bad girl, and so I think I should tell you, just so that you don't, if you don't want to ever speak to me again. I was in a book that came out in 2006 by a man called David Horowitz, it was called The Professors. Anybody heard of it? America's 101 Most Dangerous Professors. Ta-da! So, I mean, it's not exactly like 320 miles per hour on a motorbike, but it was, for a while it felt like it. So, already by May, she's beginning to get this sense of herself as entering into a man's world. So here, I love also the setting, you know, in a bucolic woods. Instead of asking about the bike, look, I've got a gorgeous bike, the first question I'm always bummed with is, how do you, she always does O in the middle, how do you manage to get onto this bike? And I must say, sometimes there are pictures of her, you may have seen her in high heels, absolutely gorgeous outfit. This answers the question, so what she's doing, the question you guys keep asking about my height, alhamdulillah. And that's how tall she is. She's quite tall. So so you now have evidence of this. The numbers of responders, likes, comments, increasing all the time. This is December the 31st. And she writes, here is my last day, the last ride of hashtag 2017. What added to the fun was riding with a batch of soul superbikers, boss, on the most foggy day of the season. Thank you, Supreet, for making it special for us. So, the only woman among them studying Arabic and Islamic history. So, February, this is her year. So in the same way that we've spent a year with Riverbend, we've now spent very quickly a year with Roshni Misbah. It's been a year, mashallah. Last year this time, when Hijabi Bikers News started taking rounds nationally, and I started receiving 1,000+ messages a day, so much of appreciation and recognition. I was all happy and nervous at the same time. I didn't know how to react when people wanted to take selfies with me. I was and am still in college, I know, because actually we met her, I think, 4 days after that. It was a turning point in my life. My life has changed. So when I asked her about the connection between sort of challenging a very, very male-centered universe and her study of Islam, she said something that I've heard Islamic feminists say also, that you have to train yourself in ijtihad. You have to learn how to read the Quran and Sunnah in order to find what it is that you can do, not what men or even women who don't know these texts as well as you do, you have to find out for yourself, and you apply it to yourself. It's not ijma for the community, it's ijtihad for yourself. So I thought it would be interesting for you just to see a page. I know it's really blurry, but it just gives you a sense. That's it. And if you go to Hijabi Biker, and she might even friend you. So she's on September the 23rd, she's now got, as you were saying, she's got hundreds of followers. And she tells these guys how much she loves them. But on that same day, she does something that I think, she talks about the earlier turning point in her life. What for me is the turning point, and very much the turning point in Riverbend's life, is when the person who's writing the autobiography begins to realize that this autobiography that started probably as a memoir, a diary, something for yourself, has become important for others. Here it's easier to recognize that what you have written has become important for others because you got the response. But this is true in all of the autobiographies that I've been speaking about. It's that moment when you realize, oh my goodness, I've become famous and I have to do something. And so she initiates this ride for girl-child education with Roshni Misbah. And they're going to do 9,000 kilometers across the country, taking the Golden Quadrilateral route for the cause of girl-child education. I'll be covering and meeting you guys in the following cities with fellow Indian motorcyclists. So this was something, I didn't really identify it so clearly in Riverbend's autobiography. But there is that moment when she realizes, oh my goodness, people actually don't know about Iraqi women's educational, occupational status. I have to tell them about it. And then she'll have a commentator who will ask something about Islam that indicates that that person has no idea about Islam. And she realizes, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to write about Islam, realizing that because of the number of followers that she has, that she can be more effective as an informant, as a teacher of Islam than even Bruce and I could be, because she's getting through to so many people. So this is where she was on September the 23rd. By the way, when we met with her in February, she had just come from just below Kashmir to Kerala. Yes, so huge distances. So here she is with a group of them. So what I think is interesting about this, if you look at it, that she's got men to ride with her the 9,000 kilometers. There may be women, because there is a group called the Bikerni or Bikerni. Is it Bikerni? Bikerni? Anyway, it's Biker and I, in Delhi, where there are women bikers that she's encouraged them to come together. And so October the 14th, it's the 20th day, and they're going to do the final 550 kilometers. And so she has inspired these men to come with her and to make the trip. So in closing, what I've been talking about here is what I would call cyber public intellectuals. I think you're more familiar here in the Middle East than we are in America with the reality of public intellectuals. We talk a lot in America about public intellectuals, but basically they're talking heads on television. And certainly in the Arab world, poets in particular have had huge moral authority that has turned them into public intellectuals, to whom people turn in times of problems, of crisis, and look to them for guidance. Because in most Arab countries, there's so much distrust of the state that these people stand in for that entity that should have moral authority. And what, of course, is important here, and it's not going to be true 10 years from now, so we're talking about a specific moment. These are very young people. They're people, in some cases, younger than you, who you are, who have now got enormous moral authority. People turn to them for strength. Women turn to Riverbend's autobiography to gain strength as things in Iraq continue to be really terrible. And as I try to indicate, we have Roshni Misbah empowering women of her own age to take on the forbidden male space, whatever it is. In her case, she's advocating women entering into men's biker communities. And the person that I didn't mention, but who is a student of ours, wrote, her name is Leila Al-Haddad. She's Palestinian from Gaza, did her major with us. She then, I think she's still working with Al Jazeera, and started a blog of, a separate blog. It's called Gaza Mom, M-O-M, one word. And she was having a baby, and her husband is Palestinian, but from the West Bank. And so they were not able to be together a lot of the time. He's now in America. And so she writes from the perspective of the witness, the political commentator, the personal narrative eye, what it was like to be in Gaza during the terrible first years of the 21st century. And in all three cases of these three women, we have the growing awareness that they're writing for others, and then the affirmation that their life is important. So, do you have questions?